because I've come to the conclusion that working for money is the root of all evil. So, what do we mean by idleness? Do we mean just sitting around? I don't think most human beings enjoy sitting around with nothing to do. It drives us up the wall. By idleness is meant freedom from oppression, the freedom to grow and develop as an individual, with that sense for community, which brings both rights and responsibilities. And it's most important, this question of rights. I'm sure I'm speaking to the right people. Rights and responsibilities. On the final page of his non-fiction book, Life and Money, O'Duffy has this to say: "An independent income is essential for freedom, for no man can be free if his livelihood depends on his pleasing someone else, whether the state or a private employer. All men and women have the right to be free. Therefore, every man and woman has the right to an independent income." This idea is echoed in Social Credit, Some Questions Answered, in the little booklet that is floating about here. So let's look at working for money. Working for money is to continue working for a money system which is designed to create work, more work, and even more work, on terms dictated by the apex of the pyramid of power. And that's because a vast army of workers is necessary to maintain the artificial edifice that is world civilization at the present time. There must be people willing to produce material goods. There must be people willing to wheel and deal in the money values of those goods, all through the different stages of production, and there must be people willing to sell the goods and advertise them and sell them on to the final consumer. There must be people willing to man the transport and communication systems and to provide the educational and medical and legal services. There must be people willing to give birth to new workers and to rear them to the point where they are willing and able to be employed. All this is necessary to sustain the money powers. But the money system has no need to take account of the free gifts of nature or the essential tasks of family and community life. If two housewives clean their own homes, they are classed as unemployed. If they agree to clean each other's houses for money, they are classed as being employed. Being employed means that you are making a contribution to the money economy. Being unemployed means that you are a drain on the money economy. If you are not working for money, you're not making a contribution, however hard you work. Caring for the land, caring for the sick, only counts if you do it for money. This we look back at, we don't need to put the diagram up, the circular flow, but you can follow what I'm saying, that it's only those things within the circular flow that count, and all those other things which maintain the household, maintain the land, maintain the people, all those things are just not counted. They just somehow produce what's needed by the firm, by the economy, and the rest of it is just supposed to turn up. Now, what exactly are we doing when we work for money? The accepted notion is that we make a contribution to society, and in reward for that contribution, we are given money, and with that money, we can buy the goods and services produced by everyone else. The way we spend our money determines demand, It calls into production and hence onto the market those things that we all, as members of a democratic body of citizens, want to see produced. In actual fact, it doesn't quite happen like that. I draw attention to a Wikipedia article on working time, which is most illuminating, and I've had to cut it really down. And it points out that working for money came in with the Industrial Revolution on a daily basis. I mean, that we've always had people who will do a little bit of casual work for money and so on. But really, it's with the Industrial Revolution that we have this system of everybody being expected in some way to work or earn money. The Industrial Revolution made it possible for a larger segment of the population to work all year round. Labour was not tied to the season, and artificial lighting made it possible to work longer each day. As peasants and farm labourers moved from the rural areas to the factories, working time during the year increased significantly. Before collective bargaining and worker protection laws, there was a financial incentive for a company to maximise the return on expensive machinery by having long hours. Records indicate that work schedules as arduous as 12 to 16 hours per day, 6 to 7 days a week, were practiced in some industrial sites. Machines brought more, not less, work. The automobile manufacturer Henry Ford, we heard about earlier, was an ardent proponent of a shorter working hours, which he introduced in his own factories. This policy was pursued for business and not humanitarian reasons. Workers were also the main consumers of products. And they needed adequate leisure time to consume those products. Over the long term, consumer markets need to be grown. In view of this, the economy has become the predominant one since then. This view of the economy has become predominant. By the mid-20th century, following the Second World War, it might have been expected that the people would demand an age of leisure, the age of leisure predicted by Douglas, Arage and the social credit movement. History worked out differently. Again, the Wikipedia points this out. Beginning in 1950, under the Truman administration, and continuing with administrations ever since, the United States has become the first industrialized nation to explicitly, albeit secretly, and permanently forswear a reduction in working time. Given the military-industrial requirements of the Cold War, the authors of the then secret National Security Council document 68 proposed the US government to undertake a massive permanent national economic expansion that would let it siphon off a part of the economic activity produced to support an ongoing military build-up to contain the Soviet Union. The United States could achieve a substantial absolute increase in output and could thereby increase the allocation of resources to a build-up of the economic and military strength of itself and its allies without suffering a decline in its real standard of living. President Truman, in his 1951 annual message to the Congress, stated, "In terms of manpower, our present defence targets will require an increase of 1 million men and women in the armed forces within a few months, and probably not less than 4 million more in defence production by the end of the year. This means an 8% increase of our labour force, and possibly much more will be required by defence needs by the end of the year. These manpower needs will call both for increasing our labour force by reducing unemployment and drawing in women and older workers, and for lengthening hours of work in essential industries. These manpower requirements can be met." Despite the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, Working time has remained unchanged by subsequent administrations and Congress. By 2007, the statistics show an actual extension of working time of 247% over the 57-year period. In other words, the demand for more work is coming from the apex of the pyramid. As is demonstrated in An Inside Job and other documentaries, the world economy is in effect one unit. Individual countries such as Australia and the UK may offer the illusion of democratic control, but it is an illusion. The same factors have swept across the world. Wherever you go, people find it necessary to work longer and longer hours in subjection to the pyramid of power. There is no such thing as a free market economy. Working for money is to support the pyramid of power. But what is the alternative? Over the years, I've found that the real issues are never tackled by the methodologies of the social sciences. Instead, it is from literature and the arts that I have drawn the most inspiration. Social artists, that is, people who see society as a living entity, rooted in the soil, the seasons and community, are not at all like those most dismal of social scientists, the economists, who see money and merely assume the existence of a real economy. If we cannot be creative, we cannot become social artists. Each one of us will leave a bleak future for our children. It will be a future where to be fully human in our present understanding of the world will be to be an outcast. Quite literally, an outcast. In recent editions of the Social Creditor, we have carried references to 20th century works of literature which are full of foreboding. These include E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops, which was published in 1909, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, 1933, George Orwell's 1984, published in 1949. We have also reprinted an article by Chris Hedges on the latter two dystopias, entitled 2011, A Brave New Dystopia. In the course of his paper, which pulls no punches, the author brings home the truth about power in the 21st century. And he quotes Orwell. "The party seeks power entirely for its own sake," wrote Orwell in 1984. "We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, not wealth or luxury or long life or happiness, only power, pure power. What pure power means, you will understand presently. We are different from all the oligarchies of the past in that we know what we are doing. All the others, even those who resembled ourselves, were cowards and hypocrites." The political philosopher Sheldon Wolin uses the term inverted totalitarianism in his book Democracy Incorporated to describe our political system. It is a term that would make sense to Huxley. In inverted totalitarianism, the sophisticated technologies of corporate control, intimidation, and mass manipulation, which far surpass those employed by previous totalitarian states, are effectively masked by the glitter, noise, and abundance of a consumer society. Those sophisticated technologies of corporate control, intimidation, and mass manipulation, which far surpass those employed by previous totalitarian states, are indeed effectively masked by the glitter, noise, and abundance of our consumer society. That glitter, noise and abundance is absolutely essential for the holders of power to hold on to their power. It is essential that we do not think. It is essential that we keep working for a money reward, because that is how we maintain the powers that be at the top of the pyramid. The apex needs the base to do as we are told. That means you and me. It is in our interests, in our self-interest, to work for money so that we can buy the consumer products dangled before our eyes. The present economic debate is based upon the premise that people will only work if they are paid money to do so. And people are indeed all too willing to work for money. Back in 1933, O'Duffy summed it up beautifully. Goshawk bought up all the natural world and charged people to see it. Although Condinia has defeated him in the great battle against Goshawk's International Air Force, the employment system remains and now proves to be a barrier to the liberation of the birds. The people are not interested in freedom. All they want is to work for money. Let's see if I can find... The first difficulty that had arisen was with the many vested interests that had grown up around the goshawk aviaries. The feeding and care of the birds gave employment to more than 3,000 men. About 1,000 more gardeners, carpenters, metalworkers, painters and the like were engaged in keeping the grounds and cages in order, besides a couple of 100 gatekeepers and attendants. Then there were the owners of booths, refreshment rooms, sideshows and conveyancing, with their employees, not to mention a crowd of photographers, hawkers of matches and confectionery, and picture postcards, fortune tellers and others. All these would lose their means of livelihood if the aviaries were abolished. The shops and lodging houses of the neighbourhood would lose the greater part of their custom in consequence. Finally, the contractors who supplied the requirements of the institution would be deprived of lucrative orders and be compelled to dismiss large numbers of their employees. Angry remonstrances had come in from all quarters, the labourers in particular declaring that they would resist the closing of the aviaries by force. "Tut, tut," said Mr. Slawmy-Cander. "We cannot allow our noble and idealistic work for humanity to be held up by such selfish and parochial interests as these." "True," said Condinia. "Therefore, I would have you point out to these people, in such simple language as they can comprehend, that although their means of livelihood must be taken from them, their livelihood itself shall not." "I do not understand you, sir," said Mr. Slawmy-Cander. "Do you mean to suggest that all these people are to be paid in future for doing nothing?" "Why, truly," said Condinia. "For as the work they are doing is not only useless but harmful, if it is left undone, the world will be no poorer than before, if not richer. Therefore, we can go on paying them without loss." I'll leave you to read the rest of that. O'Duffy shows that the grip of the pyramidal propaganda machine is so powerful that the powers that be have nothing to fear from a rampaging demigod. The workers themselves are content with their wage slavery status. Continue with that. Another of Condinia's difficulties was that the world showed itself completely indifferent to the birds which he had been at such pains to deliver. One after another, the governments replied to his message that it was no time to bother about a lot of songbirds. that what the world really needed was the restoration of normal trading conditions. And in this attitude, they were supported by the people, among whom the general opinion began to spread that although Condinia might be a good man at handling a fighting plane, he was in other respects a bit of a crank and unfitted to manage practical affairs. A demigod, said the popular press, is no doubt valuable in stimulating the natural idealism of mankind, and idealism is an excellent thing in its proper place. The problem before the world, however, is essentially a practical one and can only be solved by sane, hard-headed men with practical experience. The socialist press said more concisely, "We've had enough of this demigod with his bourgeois dilettantism and his callous regards of the real needs of the workers. What workers want is not birds, but work." However, in spite of all this counter propaganda, Condinia still seems to be winning the argument for the freeing of the natural world from the grip of finance. And when this happens, the powers that be wheel out their top economists onto the platform of the world's media, just as in that first talk, Crowther was wheeled out onto the national media in the UK. Professor Banga is again on that world media. He comes forward to explain the situation, and I have to start a little way through this or else we'll be here all day. So the Economist explains, why are people employed and how do they come to be employed? Simply because someone with money saved from personal consumption employs them to produce something which he can sell at a profit. If there were no incentive to such people to save and invest their money, there would be no employment for anybody. We would simply stand about with our hands in our pockets and starve. That was what actually happened in primitive times. There were no capitalists to employ the people, so they just sat down and died. Supposing a party of people were wrecked on a desert island, what do you think would be the first thing they'd do? Obviously, they would look around for a man with money to employ them in gathering fruit. If there were no capitalist among them, or if he didn't see his way to make a profit out of the business, they would all remain unemployed and starve to death, no matter how fertile the island might be. If, therefore, we want to have plenty of employment, we must give every possible incentive to entrepreneurs, encouraging them to get as much of our money from us as they can, so that they can spend it on employing us to make more for them. The accumulation of the birds in the goshawk aviaries illustrates this perfectly. Upwards of 10,000 people are employed in the magnificent industry who would otherwise be condemned to perpetual destitution. Yeah, it makes one quite thoughtful when people say giving money for nothing or giving money for so on. People are unfortunately only too willing to listen to the bankers and economists who are wheeled out by the financial powers to defend the status quo. So what is this money for which we are prepared to offer our lives? When the workers demand work, they do not mean they want freely to give service to the community out of love of God and their fellow man. They really think they want a money wage in return for their sacrifice of time and effort and labour. So what form would money take on a desert island, as we just heard? Would it be dollars, pounds, gold, coins, paper, cheques, plastic cards, computer blips. The whole question of money, of what is money and what is value, has been the subject of many long books, films and lectures. The short answer is we have a money system which, with a little judicious juggling, could be made to serve God rather than mammon. It is, as Geoffrey Crowther well knew, merely a question of simple bookkeeping. So we look at the proposals for the national dividend. These have been the subject of popular and informed debate for at least a century. There is no earthly reason why a basic income, national dividend, citizens' income, or citizens' dividend, call it whatever you like, should not be paid to each individual regardless of financial circumstances or work contribution. Given the political will, this birthright could be paid out tomorrow at the mere stroke of a legislator's pen. Would guaranteed income result in mass laziness? Would people just sit around twiddling their thumbs until they starved to death, as O'Duffy's economists would have us believe? These are questions for us all to supply, using the insights of O'Duffy, for us to explore. And Douglas and a host of writers have left a rich legacy of literature for us to study. Flowing from these talks, an accessible starting point would be, I suggest, further reading from Asset in Clover, backed by the social credit Some Questions. An understanding of the history of these ideas can be gained from my book, Understanding the Financial System. But we've said once or twice during these discussions that finding solutions, we do need to know where we want to go. What are we trying to do? Patrick Curry wrote a fascinating book, Defending Middle-earth, Tolkien, Myth and Modernity. And he wrote about Tolkien's work. And what he said is this: what Tolkien called hope without guarantees is vital. It permits wonder to act, and this in turn enables places to be defended. Then this mutually nourishing trinity, in which each helps the other to survive and thrive, can increasingly overtake its mirror image, hopelessness, nihilism, and nowhere, which also feed off each other. So no matter how dark the future appears, we must, like Frodo, Sam, and, just as importantly, Gandalf, refuse despair. The future is not fixed. There are still places on earth that are beautiful and loved and cared for. There are still wonders, people who can wonder, and indeed who work wonders. And that is what the Lord of the Rings itself conveys. Arda, the earth, unmarred and even healed. That includes us. Tolkien's Middle-earth gleams with the light of an ancient hope, peace between peoples and with nature and before the unknown. It has truly been said that without vision, people perish. If we look again at the pyramid of power diagram and the broad base, without the mass of people at the base doing all the work, the apex of the pyramid would be suspended in powerlessness. The structure would crumble. So the question is, do we continue to swallow the fantasies, lies, and half-truths being fed down to us? Do we abide by the economic laws? Do we go to work to earn the money, to buy the mass of consumer goods, the wealth which is really waste fouling the earth? Or do we begin to change our own hearts and minds so that we can begin to build alternatives? Now, we have heard today and yesterday of some alternatives that are being built here. And out of the 20th century traumas, we do have many examples of good threefolding practice within institutions which have been found and documented and recorded in different ways. Examples of non-oppressive ways of working together can especially be found in communities where the work of Rudolf Steiner has been studied. And these include socially responsible banks, such as Triodos, suppliers of health products, such as Weleda, Waldorf schools, organic and biodynamic farming initiatives, and Camp Hill communities providing long-term care for adults with learning difficulties. Unlike the pyramidal structures of the world economy, these initiatives flourish in particular circumstances, in particular places, when particular individuals come together in a trusting vision to work for the future. At the same time as seeking of ways of working together in the real economy, we need to study options for political change in the form of rights to a basic citizen's income or a national dividend, whatever we call it. And above all, we need to find ways to bring culture, the arts and learning out of the grip of the powerful pyramid of finance. I've tried to open up some lines of thought for and about the future. It's entirely appropriate that this series of talks should have been organised by the Australian League of Rights. At present, opinion formers in education and the media continue to be paid by the powers that be of the pyramid of power, just as they were when Clifford Hugh Douglas first put pen to paper nearly a century ago. It has been an abiding rule of social credit organisations that speakers and writers make their contribution on a purely voluntary basis. In that way, we cannot be infiltrated. When we are attacked, in the ways outlined in my first talk, it is a sign that we are making progress. We have a wealth of brilliant literature from the past to help us on our way. It is our most dangerous weapon. Let us work together to use it to the best of our ability. That is all that we can do.
All we really need is to get that pyramid standing on its point for the people on top, don't we?
Thank you. That is a very good question. When I've used this before, people have tended to feel that was the case, that you could somehow or other reverse it, but they would cease to exist if they were not on top. They would be powerless, and therefore they would cease to have any kind of a function. And that's why the threefolding idea is the one that comes into play. At the moment, we've got this rigidity of that is where the alternative comes, so that you've got the cultural system in which you've got the information flows, you've got the training, you've got the education, you've got the whole sort of ways of understanding, the stories that you tell in that cultural system. And then so that you know what you're talking about. And you've got ways of working together, but importantly, you've got this equality in the political sphere, so that rather than having the power coming down and that illusion of power that we have in our present democratic system being obscured by the power coming down, then we have actually got everybody has a right. And again, I could talk forever, you see, on this whole question of organisation. It's something which I think we neglect, the ways we work together, whether it's in a little voluntary group or whether it's within a country as a whole. There are structures and ways of working together which we need to develop and think about a lot more carefully. We are too easily fed a line down by the line managers, by the legal people who are telling us that this is now the new law. We're talking about carbon taxes and so on. Those things are being fed down to us, and we need to be able to look at this. I suppose I ought not to wave my glasses, but there's this little bit, this political system here, and so that there are the human rights regulation are regulated by all of us, not coming down this way, with the backed by the military, you see, and the whole arms question. So we need to be building up from here this kind of a way, and that will just take the rug from the pyramid, underneath the apex of the pyramid, if you can do that.
In Australia, we already have a national dividend system. It's called the pensions. The flaw in it is that it's means tested and it's paid from taxation. Should we start working from there?
Thank you. Yes, brilliant. No, that is exactly what I mean. There have been these experiments also in Scandinavia, where they found that, I mean, we have a mixture of state pension and work pensions, work-based pensions. What they found in Denmark was that when they introduced a good state pension, then people ceased to try to build up a work-based pension and were content to work with that. Now, we have that model, and then we also have a child allowance or child benefit, family benefit system. Different types of systems at the moment, all means tested. So when you look at the country as a whole, and this is my argument, that we are all receiving some kind of a money income. Now, why don't we just say, right, there is a level, not necessarily great riches, but there is a level below which you don't fall, so that you can go to work and you can earn any amount of money, or you can do and mend with that little bit. It's up to you. And that could actually be done overnight, literally overnight. It could be agreed if we had the political will. It's just a matter of bookkeeping. It's just a matter of accounting. It would have a very interesting effect. And that's what's worth thinking about. Some people, probably the following day, would go to work as usual. But some of them might begin to say, well, the conditions that are being imposed on me now are intolerable. I'd rather think about this one. I don't have to go to work. And if the employing body needs you badly enough, then they will change. You don't have to even stop, but you can just threaten to stop. And they will soon change their tune.
Well, the problem at the moment is that all of these, I suppose the argument for these, from a political perspective, is used for vote buying. So now we come into the power side of it, and if I remember correctly on what I think your first address, there was something about funding of political parties.
Yes. You see, this is so interesting, isn't it? When you begin, when you begin to look at this, many of the ideas which we introduce, we try to hang them onto the tree of our preconceptions, the way that we've worked together before. And this is one of the worries about the idea. As I say, you could introduce a national dividend overnight. It could be done. But it is extremely dangerous, because you could have a political party that comes in or a political grouping from the apex of power and says, right, you can have your national dividend as long as you do X, Y, and Z. You see, it may be that you go to work and you can't have it for nothing, and so on. So the difficulty is getting one's head round the fact that we have to think of this area, freeing it from the system, because the political parties are in that, wherever it's disappeared to, that apex of power, the where are we? Yes, the world government, you see. At the moment, these people, if you were to introduce the national dividend, shall we say, at this point, then these people would immediately influence the political parties and make sure that they countered it. So it's in seeking different ways of working together within the economic field as well that we and freeing ourselves, seeing how much we can get away with outside the money system. I suspect that this is really one of the basic things, to reduce our dependence on the money system. And again, there are ways of doing that increasingly when you begin to think about it. Farmers know very well, you know, if there's a way to get round it without spending money, you're going to do it. So you are probably going to have to lead the way.
Francis, there's absolutely no doubt that some money has to come into the community to offset the debt, the A plus B bit, which we haven't mentioned, but basically the cost of production are greater than the amount of income derived from the workforce. We'll leave it at that. So we acknowledge that there's some new money has to come into the system, and I'd like to find another way rather than the national dividend for these reasons, and some of you have heard me on this before. But in Australia, we have quite a lot of difficulty getting workers to do menial jobs like fruit picking and some general farm work. We've even got to the stage now where we're having fly-in, fly-out people from the islands and the Pacific. I don't believe that's a good way to go. And I can accept that eventually there's got to be a whole philosophical change where people will have a different attitude. But I think to bring a dividend in for everybody, or even those at the lower level, you said, I think it's only going to foster that problem. And would you be opposed to that same amount of money, for instance, just being transferred straight to local government, which would mean we could have better services at the local level, or we could have a reduction in rates? Or do you accept those other sort of means of distributing that money?
Yes, you see, we're trying to peg our new ideas onto the old framework, yes. And that makes it extremely difficult, because as we heard in the Asses in Clover story, where you've got the aviaries and you've got all the work surrounding the care of those birds, and this comes up several times in the story, that work, meaningless work, useless work, a lot of people are working. The reason that they're not available to pick the fruit is that they are doing useless, meaningless things, like making those rubber ducks that were being shown, and you see, which are harmful and destructive. And this is one of my problems with the A plus B theorem, is that it makes it sound as if production going up is a good thing, your price levels and so on. But a great deal of the production that goes on in the modern world today is the production of armaments. And the production of armaments is very lucrative because you sell to one side, you sell to the other side, they destroy, and you've got plenty of opportunity for increasing production. But you're not increasing wealth. So these questions are all a bit tricky. And to add to that, I think a lot of people would prefer to be picking fruit in the open air, to be working day in, day out on some of these tedious factory jobs and administrative jobs, working in, offices for long hours.